Two kids, $1 each, and a sealed steel door buried in the middle of nowhere. What we found inside wasn't just survival, it was the truth. It was the story of a family we thought had thrown us away, and a last, desperate act of love that reached us across the grave. If you've ever felt lost and wondered if there's a place for you in this world, if you've ever had to fight for a place to call your own, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. Because sometimes, home isn't a place you're given, it's a place you unearth. The end felt less like a bang and more like the tired sigh of a door clicking shut. One moment, I was standing in the floral wallpapered hallway of my Aunt Carol's house. The next, the deadbolt was sliding home, leaving me and my sister Maya on the wrong side of it. I was 17, 3 months shy of legal adulthood. Maya was 15, and her eyes were wide and dark, reflecting the cold, indifferent gray of the suburban sky. She was clutching the strap of her backpack so hard, her knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. I had a matching backpack, filled with a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the collected works of a life that now felt impossibly small. Aunt Carol's voice, muffled by the solid wood of the door, was the last piece of our old life we'd ever hear. "I can't do this anymore, Leo. I just can't. The state can figure it out." Then, silence. The silence of the suburbs is a special kind of loud. It's filled with the hum of air conditioners, the distant bark of a dog you'll never see, the rustle of leaves in trees you'll never climb. It's the sound of other people's lives going on as normal. For us, normal had just ended. I put my arm around Maya, pulling her into my side. Her slight frame trembled. "What do we do, Leo?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the vast, empty quiet. I looked up and down the manicured street, at the identical houses with their identical lawns, and their identical lives tucked safely inside. I had no answer. For the first time, the sheer terror of being the older brother, the one who was supposed to have the answers, washed over me like ice water. I was just a kid myself, a kid in charge of another kid. "We walk," I said, the words feeling hollow and useless. "We just walk for now." And so we did. We walked away from the only home we'd known since our parents died 2 years prior, a home that had never truly felt like ours. It was a borrowed space, filled with resentment and the constant unspoken reminder that we were a burden. Now, the burden had been officially shed. We walked until the manicured lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and strip malls, and then we kept walking until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that felt like a mockery of our gray, colorless situation. That first night was spent in a bus station, huddled together on a hard plastic bench under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I didn't sleep. I watched Maya's chest rise and fall with each shallow breath, and I made a silent promise to whatever might be listening that I would not let her fall. I didn't know how I was going to keep it, but I promised anyway. The next day brought the system, a payphone call, a series of transfers, and finally the weary voice of a social worker named Mr. Davies, who told us to report to a youth shelter downtown. The shelter was clean, institutional, and smelled of bleach and despair. It was a place of last resort, filled with kids whose stories were all different, but ended in the same place. We were numbers on a list, mouths to feed, problems to be managed. Maya retreated into herself, her silence a wall I couldn't seem to break through. I spent my days on the phone, trying to find another relative, a friend of our parents, anyone who would be a better option than this. Every call was a dead end. We were alone. It was about a week into our stay a week of stale cereal and scratchy blankets, that I got a different kind of call. It was from a man named Arthur Henderson, a lawyer from a small firm 3 towns over. His voice was calm, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the harried bureaucrats I'd been dealing with. "Am I speaking with Leo Vance?" he asked. I confirmed that I was. "Mr. Vance," he began, and the formality of it was almost comical, given I was speaking to him on a greasy phone in the hallway of a homeless shelter. "I am the executor of your paternal grandfather's estate. I've been trying to locate you and your sister for some time." My grandfather. I barely remembered him. He was a ghost in our family, a man our father rarely spoke of. He'd lived somewhere remote, a recluse, people said. He'd passed away years ago, when I was maybe 10. We hadn't gone to the funeral. "His estate?" I asked, my voice cracking. "There's an estate?" I pictured a mansion, a forgotten fortune. A ridiculous, childish fantasy bloomed in the barren landscape of my mind. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a dry, papery sound. "Well, estate is perhaps a generous term. The man lived a very simple life. There's no money to speak of, I'm afraid. Most of his assets were used to cover his debts." The fantasy popped, leaving behind the familiar sting of disappointment. "However," he continued, "there is one remaining item, a piece of property, 5 acres of unimproved rural land in Harding County. According to his will, it is to be passed to his grandchildren. That's you and Maya." 5 acres of land. The words hung in the air. It sounded important, significant. "What's on it?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Nothing," he said flatly. "That's why it's taken so long to settle. It's essentially worthless. It's landlocked, has no utility access, and the soil quality is poor. The county values it at next to nothing. We've had it on the market for years, with no offers." Worthless, of course it was. "So what's the point?" I asked, the hope draining out of me again. "It's a formality," Mr. Henderson explained patiently. "The will is clear. The property must be offered to you. If you want it, you must formally claim it. There is a $2 deed transfer fee, $1 for you, 1 for your sister. If you decline, the state will seize the property for back taxes and auction it off. Honestly, son, that's probably the best course of action. It's not worth the paperwork." He was advising me to let it go. A sensible, pragmatic adult giving sensible, pragmatic advice to a homeless kid. But he'd said something that snagged in my mind. A place. It wasn't a home, it wasn't money, it wasn't a solution. But it was a place that was ours. I found Maya sitting on her cot, staring at a crack in the plaster wall. I told her about the phone call. Her eyes, which had been dull and vacant for days, flickered with something, a tiny spark. "Land?" she whispered. "Our own land?" "Worthless land," I corrected gently. "Mr. Henderson said it's just dirt and weeds in the middle of nowhere." "But it would be ours," she insisted, looking at me directly for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Ours. Not Aunt Carol's, not the shelter's. Ours." In her voice, I heard the echo of my own desperate thought. The logic was insane. We had maybe $40 between us, scavenged from our last allowances and the change at the bottom of our backpacks. We had no car, no food, no plan. Taking ownership of a useless plot of dirt hundreds of miles away was the single most irrational thing we could do. It was an anchor that would drown us. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the only anchor we had. "It costs $2, I said, testing the words. $1 each." Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill she'd been saving. She smoothed it out on her knee and held it out to me. Her hand was steady. Her gaze was clear. "I've got my half," she said. And in that moment, the decision was made. It wasn't a decision born of hope, not really. It was a decision born of having nothing left to lose. I called Mr. Henderson back and told him we wanted it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him shaking his head. "Son," he said, his voice laced with a gentle pity, "are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We're sure." The paperwork took a few days. Mr. Henderson, to his credit, handled everything remotely, faxing documents to a copy shop near the shelter. We signed our names on the dotted lines, our hands shaking slightly. It felt momentous and absurd at the same time. We were now landowners, proprietors of 5 acres of forgotten dirt. Once the deed was filed, he mailed us a copy, along with a hand-drawn map he'd found in my grandfather's files. It was a crude sketch, showing a county road, a creek, and an X marking the spot. With the deed in our hands, the reality of our choice began to set in. We couldn't stay at the shelter forever. Now we had a destination, as bleak and unpromising as it was. We pooled our money. After buying 2 one-way bus tickets to the town closest to Harding County, a place called Silver Creek, we were left with $12 and a bag of trail mix. The bus ride was a descent into another world. We watched the sprawling cityscape of our youth dissolve in the rearview mirror, replaced by an endless patchwork of suburbs, then farmland, then dense, tangled forest. The other passengers were a quiet, weary collection of souls, each lost in their own thoughts. Maya pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the trees blur into a solid green wall. I watched her. The spark I'd seen in her eyes had dimmed a little, replaced by a nervous uncertainty that mirrored my own. We were doing this. We were actually doing this. What had felt like a defiant act of agency in the shelter now felt like a terrifying leap into the abyss. The bus wheezed to a stop at a gas station that also served as the Silver Creek bus depot. The driver opened the door with a hydraulic hiss. "Silver Creek," he grunted. "End of the line." We were the only ones who got off. The bus pulled away, leaving us in a cloud of diesel fumes and a silence that was even deeper than the one in the suburbs. This was a rural silence, thick and ancient, layered with the chirp of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall pines. The town of Silver Creek wasn't much of a town at all. It was a crossroads, with a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses with peeling paint. According to the map, our property was another 5 miles down a county road. There were no taxis, no Ubers, no friendly locals offering a ride. There was just the road, a ribbon of cracked asphalt disappearing into the trees. "We walk again," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Maya just nodded, pulling her backpack higher on her shoulders. The walk was long and punishing. The sun beat down on us, and the air was thick with humidity. Cars were infrequent, and the ones that did pass us by did so without slowing, their drivers giving us curious, suspicious glances. We were outsiders here, aliens dropped into a foreign landscape. My legs ached, and my t-shirt was soaked with sweat. I kept glancing at Maya, worried she wouldn't be able to make it, but she just kept putting one foot in front of the other, her expression a stubborn mask of determination. After what felt like an eternity, we found the landmark from the map, an old stone bridge over a shallow, gurgling creek. From there, we had to count the fence posts along the side of the road. 212 posts, I muttered, rereading the faded pencil on the map. We counted. We lost count. We started over. Finally, we reached what we believed was the spot. There was no gate, no sign, not even a break in the fence. There was just a rusty property marker, a small metal stake driven into the ground, half swallowed by weeds. This was it, our inheritance, our 5 acres. I pushed my way through a tangle of thorny bushes that lined the road. Maya followed close behind. The land was exactly as Mr. Henderson had described it. It was a dense, untamed wilderness of scrub brush, spindly pines, and thorny vines. The ground was uneven and rocky. It wasn't just worthless, it felt hostile, like a place that actively resisted human presence. Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep back in. We had traded a clean bed and a shelter for this. We had spent our last dollars to become the kings of a kingdom of thorns and rocks. "Leo," Maya said, her voice small, "what did we do?" I didn't have an answer. I scanned the property, my eyes searching for, I don't know what, a sign, a miracle, anything. All I saw was green and brown, a chaotic mess of nature reclaiming its own. We were fools, delusional children who had mistaken a piece of paper for a life raft. I was about to suggest we just turn back, walk the 5 miles to town, and throw ourselves on the mercy of whoever we could find, when Maya grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing. I followed her gaze. At first I saw nothing, just a small, unnatural-looking mound of earth about 50 yards in, slightly higher than the surrounding terrain and covered in the same thick vegetation. But as I squinted, I saw what she'd seen. A flicker of light, a reflection, something metallic glinting in the afternoon sun, almost completely hidden by a thick curtain of overgrown ivy. We pushed our way toward it, the branches scratching at our arms and faces. As we got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a flat metal surface, set almost flush with the ground. We tore at the ivy, our hands raw and stinging, pulling back the thick green blanket. And then we saw it. A heavy, rectangular steel plate, about 4 feet by 3 feet. In the center was a large, rusted wheel, like something you'd see on a submarine hatch. It wasn't a cellar door. It was something else. Something built to withstand more than just a storm. It was a bunker. A sealed, buried bunker. There was no house, no shed, no structure of value, Mr. Henderson had said. He was wrong. My grandfather, the reclusive ghost, had built a secret. We stood there, panting and bleeding from a dozen minor scratches, staring at the steel door. Hope, fierce and wild, surged through me. This changed everything. This wasn't just a patch of dirt. It was a shelter, a home, if we could get it open. The wheel wouldn't budge. We both threw our weight against it, our sneakers slipping on the smooth metal. It was frozen solid with rust and time. We pushed until our muscles screamed and sweat poured into our eyes, but it was useless. The door had been sealed for years, maybe decades, and it had no intention of opening for us. We collapsed beside it, defeated. The sun was beginning to set, and the woods around us were growing dark and filled with unfamiliar sounds. The reality of spending a night out here, exposed and vulnerable, began to set in. "It's no use," I panted, my head resting against the cool, unyielding steel. "We're not strong enough." Maya didn't say anything. She was running her fingers over the rusted seam of the door, her expression thoughtful. She got up and started searching the ground around the bunker, kicking at rocks and fallen branches. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking for a tool," she said. "Grandpa must have left something. He wouldn't build a door without a way to open it." Her faith was maddening, and at the same time, the only thing keeping my own despair at bay. After a few minutes of searching, she let out a small cry of triumph. She was holding a long, thin piece of rusted rebar, the kind used in construction. It was heavy and solid. "Here," she said, handing it to me. "And I found this." It was a heavy, fist-sized rock. The plan was simple, almost stupidly so. We wedged the end of the rebar into one of the handles of the wheel. I held it steady while Maya, with a surprising strength, brought the rock down on the bar, again and again. The clang of rock against steel echoed through the quiet woods. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that sounded like the earth itself was complaining, something shifted. A shower of rust flakes fell from the wheel. "It moved!" I yelled. "It's working!" We took turns, hammering at the rebar, using it as a makeshift lever. It was brutal, exhausting work. Our hands were blistered, our arms ached, but with every jarring impact, the wheel turned another fraction of an inch. We worked in the fading light, driven by a desperate, frantic energy. Finally, with a loud, definitive crack, the seal broke. The wheel spun freely. We looked at each other, our faces grimy with dirt and sweat, and we both broke into wide, incredulous smiles. There was a handle set flush into the door. I grabbed it with both hands and pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted, revealing a dark, rectangular opening and a set of steep metal steps leading down into the earth. A wave of cool, stale air washed over us, smelling of dust, damp concrete, and time. It was the smell of a place that had been waiting. Holding my phone in front of me as a flashlight, I took the first step down. Maya was right behind me, her hand gripping the back of my shirt. The beam of light cut through the absolute darkness, revealing a small, square room. It was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a low ceiling. Against one wall were metal shelves, stacked neatly with canned goods, their labels faded but legible. There were large plastic containers of water, a first aid kit mounted on the wall, and 2 narrow cots, folded and leaning against the far side. In the corner sat a chemical toilet and a hand-crank radio. It was a survival shelter, basic and utilitarian, but it was clean, dry, and safe. It was a home. In the center of the room was a small metal desk with a matching chair, and on the desk, sitting perfectly in the middle, was a gray metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed felt, was a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with a faded red ribbon. On the top envelope, written in a spidery, elegant script, were the words, "For my grandchildren, Leo and Maya." We sat on the floor, the single beam of my phone's flashlight creating a small circle of light in the vast, silent darkness of the bunker. The air was still and cold, a perfect preservative for the secrets it held. I untied the red ribbon, my fingers fumbling slightly. The paper of the envelopes was thick and creamy, a world away from the flimsy bills and junk mail of our former life. I picked up the first one. It was simply labeled Number 1. I carefully tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The same elegant handwriting filled the page. I took a deep breath and began to read aloud, my voice sounding strange and loud in the confined space. "My dearest Leo and Maya," it began. "If you are reading this, then several things have happened. First, I have been gone from this world for some time. I hope my passing was peaceful, but I have no way of knowing. Second, you have found this place, which means you were in need of it. For that, I am deeply, deeply sorry. I never wanted this for you. I pray that you are safe." I paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in my throat. Maya had her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes fixed on the letter, as if she could see our grandfather's face in the words. I continued reading. "I imagine you have many questions about me. You may think of me as the strange old man who kept his distance, the grandfather who never sent birthday cards or came for holidays. Your father, my son, probably told you I was a paranoid recluse, a difficult man lost in his own world. He would not be entirely wrong, but I need you to understand why. I built this place with my own 2 hands, piece by piece, over the course of 5 years. I poured the concrete, I welded the steel, I stocked these shelves. It was not because I feared some great war or apocalypse, as the gossips in town used to say. I built it because I feared a much smaller, more personal apocalypse. I saw the struggles your parents were facing. Your father was a good man, a proud man, but he was haunted by bad luck. Your mother was a saint, but her health was fragile. I saw the cracks forming in their world, and I knew that one day it might shatter. I tried to help, but your father's pride was a wall between us. He didn't want my money, which he called charity. So I decided to build something else. Not a handout, but a safety net. A final option. A place to fall. This bunker, this land, it was my secret promise to them, and to you. A promise that no matter what happened, there would always be a place for you. A place that was yours, that no one could ever take away." The letter ended there. I folded the paper slowly, my hands trembling. The silence that followed was different from the silence outside. It was heavy with the weight of this revelation. All our lives, we had carried a simple story. Our parents had died, and their estranged father hadn't cared enough to be in our lives. We were the children of an orphan, twice over. But that story was a lie. This place wasn't an accident or a crazy old man's hobby. It was a deliberate act of love, a desperate, elaborate, seeping love. "He knew," Maya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He knew we'd end up alone." "He hoped we wouldn't," I corrected gently, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. I felt a confusing storm of emotions. There was gratitude, deep and overwhelming, for this incredible gift. But there was also a profound sadness for the man we never knew, for the family that could have been. And there was anger, too, a hot, sharp anger that we had needed this place at all, that the world had failed us so completely that our only refuge was a concrete box buried in the ground. We spent the next few days in a strange state of discovery. We were like archaeologists excavating our own past. We opened every can, checked every container. Everything was meticulously organized. There were manuals for everything. How to use the hand crank radio, how to purify water, how to manage the ventilation system. There were books, classic novels, survival guides, textbooks on botany and engineering. There was a box of warm clothes, vacuum-sealed and smelling faintly of cedar. My grandfather had thought of everything. He had furnished this tomb with all the tools for a new life. We read the second letter, and the third. Each one filled in a piece of the puzzle. He wrote about our father as a boy, full of laughter and a wild imagination. He wrote about meeting our mother for the first time, and how her kindness had soothed his son's restless spirit. He wrote about his own life, his work as an engineer, his love for the quiet solitude of the country. His voice, reserved and careful, became more familiar with each page. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man of quiet depth, profound love, and deep sorrow. We learned he had tried to reconcile with our father many times, but pride and old wounds had kept them apart. The bunker was his final, silent attempt to bridge that gap, to provide the protection his son was too proud to accept directly. It was a heartbreaking, beautiful, and deeply complicated inheritance. It's a heavy thing to have the entire story of your life rewritten in the course of a few days. To find out that abandonment was actually a form of protection, that silence was a language of love. Have you ever discovered a truth about your family that changed everything? A secret that made you look at your past, at the people you thought you knew, in a completely new light? It's a heavy thing to carry. It can feel isolating. If this story is hitting you in that way, if you're carrying a weight like that right now, I want you to know that this community is a place to share it. You're not alone in this. Let me know in the comments what you've learned about the complexities of family. Your story matters, and sharing it can make the burden a little lighter for all of us. The bunker, which had at first felt like a tomb, slowly began to feel like a sanctuary. It was small, but it was ours. It was dark, but it was safe. During the day, we'd leave the hatch open for light and fresh air, exploring our 5 acres of wilderness. We found a small spring-fed creek at the edge of the property, providing a source of fresh, cold water. The woods were full of birds, and we even saw a deer one evening, its gentle eyes watching us before it bounded away into the trees. We were learning the rhythms of the land, the sounds and smells of our new home. We fell into a routine. Mornings were for chores, hauling water, tidying the bunker, studying the manuals our grandfather had left. Afternoons were for exploration and reading. In the evenings, we would sit at the small metal desk, and I would read another of his letters aloud by the light of a battery-powered lantern we'd found. We were living a life completely disconnected from the world we had known. A simple, quiet existence governed by the rising and setting of the sun. It was about 2 weeks into our new life that our solitude was broken. We heard the sound first, a low rumble that grew steadily louder. It was a truck, a big one, making its way slowly down the county road. Then it stopped. We heard a car door slam, and then the sound of someone pushing through the brush at the edge of our property. Maya and I looked at each other, our hearts pounding. We quickly closed and sealed the bunker hatch, plunging ourselves into darkness and silence. We waited, barely breathing, listening to the footsteps get closer. They stopped directly overhead. There was a moment of silence, and then a loud metallic bang as someone kicked the steel door. "Hello?" A man's voice called out, muffled by the earth and steel. "Anyone here? This is private property." We stayed silent, huddled together in the dark. The man kicked the door again, harder this time. "I know someone's been here. The brush is cleared. I'm from Northwood Development. We have an interest in this parcel and the adjoining lands." Northwood Development. The name sounded cold and corporate. After a few more minutes of shouting and kicking, the footsteps retreated. We heard the truck start up and drive away. We waited for a long time before we dared to open the hatch. The world outside seemed unchanged, but we knew it wasn't. We had been found. The next day, he came back. This time, we were outside when he arrived. He was a large man in a polo shirt with a company logo, and he had an easy, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name was Mr. Gable. "Well, well," he said, looking from me to Maya and then at the bunker door. Quite the setup you've got here. Homesteading, are we? I stood in front of Maya, trying to look older and more intimidating than I felt. This is our property, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He chuckled. Technically, yes. I had my office check the county records. Leo and Maya Vance. Just kids. He took a step closer, his smile tightening. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. My company, Northwood Development, is planning a major resort community in this area. We've acquired almost all the surrounding land. Your little 5-acre plot is right in the middle of our Phase 2 construction plan. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. This land is zoned as non-residential. It has no utilities. Legally, you can't live here. What you're doing is camping at best, squatting at worst. We own it, Maya said, her voice small but firm. Mr. Gable's eyes flickered toward her. You own a piece of dirt, sweetheart, not a home. But my company is prepared to be generous. We know you're in a tough spot. We're authorized to offer you $5,000 to sign the deed over to us. Clean and simple. $5,000. The number was staggering. It was more money than we had ever seen in our lives. It was a bus ticket back to the city. It was a deposit on an apartment. It was food. It was a way out. It was a return to the world we knew. I looked at the bunker, our strange, buried home. I looked at Maya, at the stubborn set of her jaw. I thought of my grandfather's letters, of the love and sacrifice that had been poured into this place like concrete. $5,000 felt like an insult. It felt like blood money. Think about it, kids, Mr. Gable said, pulling a business card from his wallet. $5,000. You could get a real start in life instead of this. He gestured dismissively at our home. It's a generous offer, and it's our only offer. If you refuse, we'll have to go through the courts. Zoning violations, eminent domain. It gets messy and expensive. In the end, we'll get the land. The only question is whether you walk away with something in your pocket or nothing at all. He left the card on top of the bunker door and walked away, whistling. That night, we had our first real fight. The $5,000 sat between us like a ticking bomb. We should take it, Maya, I argued. It's real money. We could get an apartment, I could get a job, you could go back to school. We could be normal again. This is normal now, she shot back, her eyes flashing. This is our home. Grandpa built this for us. He didn't build it so we could sell it to some guy who wants to build a golf course. He built it to keep us safe, I countered, my voice rising. Maybe the safest thing to do is take the money and get out of here before they force us out with nothing. It's not just about safety, Leo. It's about not running away anymore. Everyone has kicked us out of their house, their life. This is the one place that was made for us. If we sell it, we're just agreeing with them. We're agreeing that we're the problem, the burden that can be paid off. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. All our lives, we had been passed along, moved around, made to feel like we were in the way. Selling this land would be the ultimate admission of that. It would be trading our grandfather's legacy for a temporary solution, a return to a world that had no place for us. It was the choice between a difficult freedom and an easy surrender. I looked around the small concrete room, at the shelves of food, at the stack of letters on the desk. This place wasn't just a shelter. It was a testament, a monument to the idea that we were worth protecting. Selling it wouldn't just be selling land. It would be selling that idea. It would be selling ourselves. Okay, I said, my anger deflating into a quiet resolve. Okay, we stay. Maya's shoulders slumped with relief. She came over and gave me a fierce hug. "We stay," she repeated into my shoulder. "We fight." The decision solidified something between us. We were no longer just surviving. We had a purpose. We were defending our home. But we were two kids against a corporation. We had no money, no lawyer, no idea what to do next. All we had was a concrete box, 5 acres of weeds, and a stubborn refusal to be erased. The next morning, I found the business card for Arthur Henderson, the lawyer who had handled the estate. I remembered his voice, calm and kind. I wasn't sure if he could help, or would even want to. But he was the only official person we had a connection to. We still had a few dollars left, and I knew the next step was a trip to town. We needed supplies, but more importantly, we needed a payphone. The walk to Silver Creek felt different this time. We weren't lost and desperate. We were on a mission. The town, which had seemed so desolate before, now looked like a potential lifeline. We went straight to the gas station, and I used the payphone outside to call Mr. Henderson's office. I left a message, explaining who I was, and that it was an urgent matter regarding the property. Then, with our remaining money, we went into the small general store next to the diner. An older woman with kind eyes and a cloud of white hair stood behind the counter. "Help you too?" she asked, her voice warm. "We just need some basics," I said, feeling self-conscious. "Soap, batteries, some flour." We picked out a few items, counting our coins carefully. The woman watched us, her expression curious but not unkind. "You're the Vance kids, aren't you?" she said. We both looked up, surprised. "Word gets around in a town this small. Heard you took over your granddad's old property." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Well, I'm Carol," she said with a smile. "Not to be confused with your aunt, I hope." A small, dry laugh escaped me. "No, ma'am, definitely not." "Your granddad, Arthur, he used to come in here," she continued, ringing up our items. "Quiet man, kept to himself, but he was always fair. People thought he was strange, but I always thought he was just sad, like he was carrying something heavy." She bagged our things. "You two look like you could use a hot meal. The stew at the diner is on me today." We tried to refuse, but she insisted. Sitting in a booth at the diner, with plates of thick, hot beef stew in front of us, felt like the height of luxury. It was the first food we hadn't eaten out of a can in weeks. People at the other tables glanced at us, but there was no hostility, just a quiet curiosity. We were no longer invisible. We were the Vance kids, Arthur's grandkids. We were becoming part of the story of this place. That afternoon, as we were about to start the walk back, the payphone at the gas station rang. The attendant yelled out the door, "Hey, is one of you Leo Vance?" It was Mr. Henderson. I told him everything, about the bunker, the letters, and the offer from Northwood Development. He was silent for a long time after I finished. "A bunker," he said finally, a note of wonder in his voice. The old man actually did it. He always said he was building a contingency plan. I thought he was speaking metaphorically. "It's real," I said, "and they want to tear it down." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Mr. Henderson said, and for the first time I heard a flinty edge in his gentle voice. "Don't you worry, son. Your grandfather paid me a retainer years ago to be used for the benefit of his heirs should the need arise. It seems the need has arisen. You aren't fighting them alone." I hung up the phone, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. We had an ally. We had a chance. The walk back to our land was filled with a new kind of energy. We weren't just defending a home anymore. We were part of a legacy. The fight ahead was going to be hard, Northwood Development wouldn't give up easily. They would send more men, more letters, more threats. But something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer scared. This land, this bunker, it had already given us something far more valuable than shelter. It had given us a backbone. We were Arthur Vance's grandchildren, and we were home. The weeks that followed were a blur of hard work and anxious waiting. Mr. Henderson was true to his word. He filed a counterclaim against Northwood Development, arguing for a historical preservation designation for the bunker, citing our grandfather's unique engineering and the structure's personal significance. It was a long shot, but it tied the developers up in legal red tape. Mr. Gable and his associates stopped visiting, replaced by a steady stream of certified letters, which we dutifully collected from a new P.O. box in town and forwarded to Mr. Henderson. With the immediate threat held at bay, we focused on making the bunker a true home. We cleared the land around the entrance, planted a small garden with seeds we bought from Carol's store, and built a rainwater collection system based on a diagram in one of our grandfather's books. We learned to identify edible plants in the woods and how to fish in the creek. We were becoming self-sufficient, capable. The fear that had defined our lives for so long was slowly being replaced by a quiet confidence. We were no longer victims of circumstance, we were creators of our own. One evening, I was organizing the last of the boxes we hadn't yet touched, the ones tucked away at the back of a storage shelf. One was heavier than the others. Inside, beneath a pile of old flannel shirts, was another metal box, smaller than the first. It was locked. There was no key. I was about to set it aside when Maya noticed a series of numbers scratched almost invisibly into the bottom. A combination. We held our breath as I turned the small dial. Click, click, click. The lock sprang open. Inside, there was no letter. There was a small velvet pouch, a thick manila envelope, and a single framed photograph. The photograph was of our parents on their wedding day. They were young, radiant, and so full of hope it was painful to see. We had never seen this photo. Aunt Carol's house had been scrubbed clean of their memory. In the velvet pouch were two simple gold bands, their wedding rings. My hands shook as I picked them up. Finally, I opened the manila envelope. It was full of money. Stacks of old $100 bills bound with rubber bands. We spread it out on the floor, our eyes wide with disbelief. It was a fortune. Tens of thousands of dollars. Tucked at the bottom was one last single sheet of paper. It was the final letter. "My children," it read, "this is the last piece of the puzzle. I am sorry for the games, but I had to be sure. I couldn't risk this falling into the wrong hands or being given to you before you were ready. Money can be a poison just as easily as it can be a cure. I needed you to find your home first. I needed you to understand that your true inheritance was not this cash, but the land, the shelter, the knowledge that you can survive on your own. I needed you to fight for it, to prove to yourselves that you are not victims. You are survivors. You are Vances. This money is your tool. Use it to defend this land. Use it to get an education. Use it to build a life, not just to get by. Your parents would have been so proud of the people you have become. I know I am. Live well. Be good to each other. That is all an old man can ask for. With all my love, your grandfather, Arthur. We sat there, on the concrete floor of our bunker, surrounded by a small fortune, with tears streaming down our faces. We weren't crying from sadness, or even from joy. We were crying from the sheer, overwhelming weight of it all. The love, the foresight, the incredible, stubborn faith this man had in us. Two children he barely knew. He hadn't just given us a shelter. He hadn't just given us money. He had given us a second chance. He had given us back our family, our history, our name. He had given us a foundation, both literally and figuratively, upon which we could build anything. The story doesn't end there, of course. A life is not a story with a neat conclusion. The legal battle with Northwood Development dragged on for almost a year, but with the funds our grandfather left and Mr. Henderson's brilliant work, we won. They were forced to redraw their development plans around our 5 acres, leaving us as a small, defiant island of wilderness in their sea of manicured lawns. We used the money to reinforce the bunker, to run a solar power line, and to buy a used truck. I got my GED, and now I'm taking online college courses in structural engineering, using my grandfather's old textbooks as my guides. Maya discovered a passion for botany and is cultivating a large, thriving garden that provides most of our food. She wants to study agriculture. We have a life here, a real one. Sometimes on clear nights, we'll climb out of the bunker and lie on our backs on the cool steel door, looking up at the stars. There are so many more of them out here, away from the city lights. We talk about our parents and our grandfather, and the strange, winding path that brought us here. We are no longer haunted by the past. We are custodians of it. This place, born from a fear of loss, has become a monument to resilience. It taught us that home isn't something you're given or something you can buy. Home is a choice. It's the place where you decide to stop running. It's the ground you defend. It's the future you build with your own 2 hands. What we found under that ivy-covered steel door wasn't just a shelter. It was the blueprint for the rest of our lives. It was the truth that even when you feel buried, you might just be planted. If our story has taught you anything, I hope it's that you are stronger than you think. You are more resilient than your circumstances. The foundations of your life might be shaken, but they can be rebuilt, sometimes in the most unexpected of places. If you're going through your own struggle right now, please share a piece of it in the comments below. Not for sympathy, but for solidarity. This community we're building here is based on the idea that our stories have power, and sharing them makes us all stronger. I read every single one, and I promise you, your story matters. And if you want to follow our journey as we continue to build this life, as we continue to learn what it means to be home, please subscribe to the channel. You're part of our community now, and we're so glad you're here.